Okay, welcome back to Business Owners Speak. Today, I'm thrilled to have Tyson Junkers with Acton Academy joining us. Tyson, how are you today?
Doing well. How about yourself?
Doing great, thank you. So I'm very curious to learn a little bit more about you and your business. Why don't you start us off by just telling us a little bit about yourself and how everything got started with Acton Academy?
Sure. I can give you sort of the backstory of how I ended up here because it it's a place that I never thought I'd be at. If you told me 3 years ago I'd be doing this, I would have probably laughed at you. Because I came from a marketing background. So I was a creative director and brand strategist for about 15 years up in New Jersey. And then COVID hit. And when that did, I my kids were home and they were in Montessori at the time. And the thing with Montessori is very hands-on. And all of a sudden the school says, "Hey, we're gonna go virtual for a while." And I was like, "Well, how do you go virtual when everything's hands-on?"
Right.
And it turns out that, and while the school was amazing and I loved the place, there was just no real way of doing that. So their experience in education and everything was almost like we're going to really be taking a break for a while from education. And I was like, well, I can't do that. I want my kids to do something. And so I started homeschooling them. And I didn't really think twice about it, but I found one through a good friend of mine, and the homeschooling he recommended was very hands off. So it's more like, hey, give them challenges, give them projects, let them experience things. And I loved it, and they loved it, and they actually were excited to do it. They'd wake up and say, "Hey, can we work on the next thing?" And I was like,
Wow.
I'm like, yeah, please go, please." I'm like, absolutely. So, and what ended up happening is my kids went back to school in the fall, and prior, like when I started homeschooling my kids, my son was doing speech therapy, and he was a little bit behind in reading. And by the time he went back into school, he no longer needed speech therapy and was reading better than any of the kids in his class. And as much as I wanted to pat myself on the back and said, "Well, it's all me, all the work I did," it was really them. It was them being interested in education. It was them interested in learning new things. And so after that, I started, they're entering their last year at Montessori. And I said, okay, well, where do I send my kids next? Because I'm like, there's got to be something similar to that education style. And I started looking things up, and I quite literally just went online and Googled, where do I send my kids after Montessori? And I find a video from Jeff Sandifer doing a TED talk, and he's the one who created the Acton Academy. So he dives into, here's what Acton Academy is all about. Here's what's so special about it. And I listened to it and I said, yeah, that's great, except that's complete nonsense. That doesn't work. I was very skeptical, as many parents are when they first hear about it. And he recommended reading the book that his wife wrote, which is the entire why behind Acton Academy. So it goes into every part of what Acton Academy is all about. And I picked up the book. I'm reading through it. Again, still skeptical about it, but I'm looking for something. And by the time I finished the book, I was like, my kids will only ever go to an acting academy. I was like, that is the coolest thing. They more than prove that this is what my children, not me, want, not just something I want, but something my children would want. And so I said, okay, I'm like, that's what I'm going to do. At the time, my wife and I started talking about moving. So I said, well, why don't we apply to acting academies in areas that we say, hey, that'd be kind of cool to live there. So, like we had my kids applied to acting academies in 6 different states, I
Oh,
think it
wow.
was. And yeah, because that we were like, that'd be kind of cool. Maybe over here, maybe over here. And because I applied, I had to sit down and talk with the owners of each. And when I talked with them and I just saw how passionate they were about it, it just kind of was that reminder to me of like, you know what, this is something that you've been looking for. This is something you've been looking, a way that you've been looking to feel about what you're doing. And I connected so strongly with the education that I did, even though it was short term during COVID, that I was like, I'm going to throw my name into the ring of opening one of these. I have to. There's a very decent application process and onboarding process, and during the application, you have to submit videos talking about why you want to open one and who you are and things like that. And so I sent it all in, kind of just saying, I don't even think they'll ever accept that. And it was, I think, 2 weeks later they wrote to me. They're like, you clearly are really passionate about this, and they said if you want to open the one in Palm Beach, you can. And so I went to my wife and I was like, yeah, so we got the okay, but I'm like, I now need to tell them yes or no. And if I say yes, it's not just, oh, yeah, sure, we'll open a school. It's yes, we will open a school and move my entire family from the state I grew up in, the state that my kids only really know, all the way down to Florida to open a school. And we did it though. We made that
Wow.
choice and we said, yeah, let's go for it. That's sort of my
That's
like
amazing.
background
So
story. Yeah.
I guess first, what are the ages, or what were the ages of the kids when you first moved down to Florida?
My kids at the time were 4 and 5.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so interesting. And so you did some homeschooling and you got a sense of it. And then, so the Acton, we'll talk about just the mindset of Acton. And as if you're sending your kids there, what can you expect?
Yeah, and so that to me is why I like when I read the Courage to Grow book, the reason why I so blown away by the school is because it is unlike any school system I've seen. There are some that do, we'll say, parts of it, but not this overall system. The simplest way of looking at it is Acton Academy is this microcosm of the real world, which means we want these kids to experience what they're going to experience in the real world as soon as possible. So we do that in a number of ways. First of all, we're a learner driven school, which means we try to put as many decisions, big and small, back into the learner's hands. We don't have teachers, so we have guides instead. So instead of us actually teaching them something from this one all-knowing expert, which is what a lot of schools do, our guides are there to put the decision making back into their hands, to answer questions with questions, and to really show them opportunities of where they can go in life, what they can do. And we do that through project-based learning. So every year is broken up into 7 different sessions. Each session is a different, we call it a quest. And so it's a project. It's everything from gardening, coding and robotics, entrepreneurship, and so on. And so they get to, instead of sitting down and taking a random collection of subjects and never seeing how they interlace with each other in the real world, we instead say, no, you'll do reading, writing, and math, and you have that in the morning during what we call core skills. But when we go into the projects, the subjects come up in the projects. But it's like, for example, gardening requires them to learn about science. Entrepreneurship is really exploring starting a business of their own, and that's some kind of product or service that they get to make. And so by having all these projects, they're already looking at it at an elementary level, saying, hey, I kind of really like gardening, and oh, but coding and robotics was really kind of awesome. And it starts stirring up their imagination of different possibilities. And one of the ones I brought up recently to a couple of parents I was talking to is, I'm like, think about it this way: if my son does gardening and he goes, that's kind of cool, but I really like coding and robotics, I wonder if I can combine them in some way. And what's great about that is as his brain starts flowing on that, he's really developing his character the whole time and who he is as a person and his strengths and his likes and his dislikes and so on. By the time he goes into middle school, they actually start doing apprenticeships. So if he really loves that idea of, hey, can I do something that's coding robotics related to gardening? He might find a place that does something like that and get an apprenticeship there. And either that's going to do one of two things. Either it's going to make him be a diehard in love with what that is and be like, I want to pursue that. Or he does it and goes, yeah, I don't like that at all. I thought I did. I'm out. But you go, great. You're in middle school. Keep going. It's not because a great example was I had a associate's degree in film. I don't even know what year this was, way back, because I was like, that's what I want to do. Got associate's degree in film. I had a good friend of mine call, and he's like, listen, I have an in at a place where you can actually be an assistant to the editors. And I'm like, that's incredible. On an actual Hollywood film that was coming out in theaters. Went out there, did that, and I was working it for about 3 months. And I was like, this is awful. Like, I want nothing to do with this. And it hit me so hard because I'm like, what did I just do for the last few years? I spent all this time and effort to get to something that I ended up realizing I don't like. And there are so many people who do that.
Yeah.
So if we can get them to experience that while it costs so little, costs almost nothing, that's awesome, because now by the time they're going into high school, they have their idea of, here's the path I'm on in life. Here's how I want to change or impact the world in some way.
That is certainly a different way of thinking of it, but of course, it makes complete sense.
Yeah.
So, had you ever owned a business or had any background in education?
I had no background in education short of my experience with homeschooling, but to me, I have always my entire life been obsessed with understanding why behind everything I do. Like, doesn't matter if I'm playing piano. I actually had an instructor for piano that I ended up, I stopped working with her because she would say, okay, here's some sheet music. We're going to learn how to play it. Here's what the like this key means this and so on. And I was like, okay, but I want to understand why they're playing it that way. And she was just like, it doesn't matter if the sheet music says it. And I'm like, but if I don't understand why, then all I'll ever be able to do is read, but not actually play from the heart or care. And so to me, that's been a part of me for my entire life. And Acton Academy to me was that this is a school that answers the why behind everything they do. So instead of a kid sitting here going, why are we learning that? And I go, well, because it's part of the curriculum, or because you have a test coming up. It's like, no, we can give you the why. And not only, we can't, it's not even about giving you the why, you're experiencing the why. And so to me, I was like, that connection was so strong when I saw that. And it actually is, as funny as it sounds, it's a good thing to not necessarily come from a public school or private school background, because you get very stuck in that teaching mentality. And we need to make sure that we're not teaching, because if we're teaching the kids, then we're actually holding them back from becoming independent and resilient themselves. So we need to stay Socratic with that. And it's very hard if you came from that background. On the entrepreneurial side, my father started a company back in 1968, and he was like Mr. Entrepreneur. So, I mean, if you had an idea for something, he could tell you, here's all the directions you can go with it. And so much of that was instilled in me, where I called myself a hobby collector, because I would love to try things. It didn't matter what it was. It was piano. It was, maybe something, photography I got into at one point, and I was actually thinking about taking this into a career. But anything I did as a hobby, it was so funny because I knew there was something in me, that like the entrepreneurial spirit in me, because anytime I did something, I'm like, all right, how can I turn this into this big thing? And I'm like, but you have a job, and you're good at your job, and you're enjoying your job. And it was like, but I kept having this knack, like there's something else calling at me, but I don't know what it is yet.
And you found it.
I 100% believe I did.
Yeah. So you mentioned curriculum. I'm curious where that comes from.
Mm-hmm. Oh, in terms of Acton and everything.
Yeah.
So Acton is really our days, like we said, we have a core skills, and that's where they're doing reading, writing, and math. What's great about those are, in terms of, say, math, they're using an iPad with an online application that allows them to move at their own pace. So instead of them sitting in the classroom and I teach to, the average student's intellect, they get to move at whatever pace they're at. And especially with kids, that always changes. You get those kids who are incredibly good at math and then eventually slow down. You get the ones who start really slow and then they skyrocket, and you're like, well, so then move at your pace, move at the pace you're comfortable with. We also we don't do grades or tests, and we instead go more like the Boy Scouts. So we do badges, and the badges, what's great about that is the badge system. You can earn a badge for going up a level in math, but you can also earn a badge for your communication skills, for your collaborative skills, your leadership skills. And there actually are requirements for them to, if they want to move up a grade level, that they actually have to use those skills. They have to use their mentorship and leadership skills, meaning they're going to be working with the, elementary might be working with the kindergarten, middle school will be working with elementary. So there actually are requirements for them to work on their leadership skills in that. And then the other part to it, the project-based part, is really about giving them or showing them opportunities. So it's not necessarily like we have boxes to check to say, okay, did we do a science? Did we do this? Those happen in there, but they're much more based on the interest of the learners that we have, and also the opportunities that are around us. And what I mean by that is, if you're in Acton Academy right on a beach, well, you can start doing different quests and projects that are related to, say, marine biology than you would if you're in the middle of a mountain range in Colorado or something. So right. It's really adaptable, but it's all about just showing them, here's possibilities. And what's great about it too is they're all, like I said, average of 5 to 6 weeks. So the worst thing that happens is for example, we'll go with my son as an example. Gardening. He actually goes the opposite way and goes, I hate everything about getting my hands dirty. I want nothing to do with this. And it's like, well, that's great, because the ultimate outcome is not, did you make a garden? Did you get something to grow? The ultimate outcome is, how were you as a person during this quest? So if he says, I don't want to get my hands dirty, I hate that. And I go, great. What do you like to do during the project? Like, what's your favorite part? And let's say he says, well, I really like when I get to lead the groups and I get to talk to them this, and you start saying to them, okay, well, isn't it possible then during the quest, if you don't want to get your hands dirty, maybe you can instead help the other groups out. Maybe you can get stuff for them. Maybe you can remind them of all the things and the steps that they need to take. You can check in on them. You can get the supply. Like there's always something you can do where he gets to build up on his strengths. And it's not necessarily like too bad you're doing this, even though you hate everything about it. It's no, work on your strengths in those situations. But sometimes he'll look at it and be like, yeah, I don't want to do that. And then he'll peek at another kid and be like, oh, that actually kind of looks fun. And you're like, okay, try it. So it's really about opportunities.
So do you have traditional grade levels, elementary and working their way up? How does that
So
work?
the way it works, yeah, it's so we will have 4 studios. Right now we just have the kindergarten, elementary, middle school, high school are coming down the road. Each of those are its own studio, which means all of kindergarten age children are together in a big open studio. All of elementary, so ages 7 to 12, they are in one big room together, where the 12-year-olds are working with the 7-year-olds and so on. And that's where it gets easier for our guides to step back, because as funny as an example as this is, it makes the point is, if all of a sudden we're going, hey, we're going to teach about Pokemon, and we have a teacher in here, and this is, again, we don't, but we have a teacher in here. And it's like, well, who's the bigger expert? Is it the teacher who's reading a book about Pokemon, or is it the kid who's literally like lived the life of everything A through Z of Pokemon? And you're like, well, no, he is. So why wouldn't we have then him do this? And so by having that wider age group, you have these experts in different areas. Same with our badge plan. You have a child who's going, oh, I'm going after this badge in math. And they go, I'm really struggling. And they can go to a wall that shows the badge plan and say, oh, this other kid has it, I'm going to go ask them. And so they really get to learn how to work together and help each other out. And again, by that let's say it's the older kid helping the younger kid, he's working not more just to get a badge and say like leadership or mentorship, but it's further solidifying the information that they learned in their head because they're helping others out.
Yeah, the collaborative nature is very interesting and very real world like, right? I mean, you gotta figure out how to find your sources of expertise and lean in. So when did you first open the doors? Like, what was the first class year, I guess?
Well, so our first official year is actually coming up this fall. We got the okay to open. So we got the space last August, and we were hoping to be able to open towards the end of that month. And we realized that there was a bunch of stuff that we had to do in the space. But again, most of the things were like, all right, we can get away with keeping it this way and opening and then changing it over time, no problem. Things like the carpet or the paint or things like that. But then when we went to get everything like the fire inspection done, town approvals and so on, all of a sudden it was, oh, well, you have to do this as well. So it was like, okay, it's a week delay. And then all of a sudden it's a month delay. Now it's another, and it just kept happening that we finally got the okay to open mid-January. And then at that point, I'm looking at it going, okay, but what families who just started bringing their kids to school again are going to switch right now? It's kind of a weird time. Like I was like, let's just concentrate on the fall and really get everything. And everything is up. Like we're technically open at this point, but let's really just focus on the fall. And it was funny. I make that decision, and immediately I get a couple families that come in saying, "Oh, well, can my kids join now?" And I'm like, we really made the decision to focus more on getting a good group in for the fall instead of sort of piecing together the rest of the year. Sure. If that makes sense. So yeah, so this fall will be the first official year.
So how does someone enroll?
So on our website, which is Acton Palm Beach, it's ACTON palmbeach.com. We have a button that just says schedule a tour. We have it linked to our calendar, meaning you go in and you pick whatever date works for you. And once they come in for a tour, because we really want them to see the space, ask the questions. I don't care if a family's like, I have 100 questions. That's awesome. You'll be here for a while, but we'll get through all of them, because it's like I said before, it is that thing where you're a little skeptical of it because you're like, this is different. And I want families to feel comfortable about it as much as I want to feel comfortable that they're excited about it. Because it's a two-way thing here, where it's like the families need to be the kind of families where a great example is like a child will come home at some point and go, this is the worst school I've ever been to. The following week will be like, this is the greatest school I've ever been to. But when your child comes home and goes, here's what happened, I'm so annoyed about this, this is whatever happened, we want the families that are looking at the child and go, great, what are you going to do about it? because the thing is, we don't have teachers. So we're not here making them do X, Y, and Z. Like there's a thing that they need to follow. But let's say the problem is with another learner in the studio or with a rule on the contract that they write up. They have everything they need to fix that problem. So ultimately, that's like why we're saying it's like if family goes, great, what do you do about it? The child needs to think it through because here they can't just go to an adult and say, give me the answer. It's like, no, you need to figure it out, or you need to find out what tool or resource you have available to you to find out. So there will be frustrations and struggle, but once they get through it, it's like if you give your child a challenge and they're so angry about, so angry about, so angry about it, and then they solve it, it is like it's the greatest thing in the world to them. Like it is the best thing that's ever happened to them. And you're like, now imagine that happening on every level where they go, oh, I know how to do this. Like I don't need somebody to give me the answer. I don't need to rely on somebody else. Like I can do this. So that independence factor and that the skills and character that build up in them is just unbelievable.
That's amazing. And I think would give a lot of parents something to think about, right? Because, there's a lot of challenges with traditional education, and many people have their own opinions about it, but Acton Academy sure sounds like something to take a look at. And if I didn't have somebody that's already in college, I would have taken a look. But so just in closing, Tyson, our connection went a little funny there, so I want to make sure we don't lose you. But what would you say to just a regular parent who really believes in the traditional education system? What would you say to them, and not to convince them, but to explain why Acton could be a good option for them?
So I'll say something that we'll see if it gets controversial for people, but the way I always look at it is that there are plenty of people who have become ultra successful, who have gone to public school, who have gone to conventional schools. But I always look at it and I say they became successful not because of the school, but in spite of the school. And I always say that because the reality is if you're teaching kids of the same age, the same thing at the same time with the same standards and the same tests, then every child should come out exactly the same on the other end. If they're not, then what's the difference? And the difference comes down to who they are. So the character that they have. And it comes down to the work that they're doing outside of the school, not in the school, because everyone's doing the same inside the school. And to me, this school, Acton Academy, is an opportunity for your child to be themselves and to grow their skills. And I want every child, and I know every child that comes in here can absolutely change the world in any way they want. And it's going to be in their unique way, not the way that I've determined for them.
Pretty convincing, if you ask me. Tyson, really appreciate your time today. Interesting insight and an interesting business, and a great alternative for those families that are looking for something that isn't the traditional education system, and could be much better for them. You just never know. So, Tyson Junkers, Acton Academy, really appreciate your time today, and we wish you the best of luck moving forward.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
All right, my pleasure.